Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, a World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and the banksters are getting a little bit worried, and they should be, because honestly, we've been reporting on this for many years. It's obviously a huge hurricane ready to take them up, sweep them away, and hopefully be rid of them, but unfortunately, people keep repeating a history over and over and over again, as we've seen for thousands of years, but we've talked about how the economy is on at a breaking point. We're seeing a recession on the near horizon if you look at the yield curve inverting, and I mean, we're talking the 10-year in 1 month, guys. It's so insane. Like, how does that even happen? How do people look at that and go, oh, that's perfectly fine, just brush it off?
Only government it makes sense for, Josh.
Yeah, it's so crazy. So the central planners are starting to get worried. I think they're honestly just trying to protect themselves when it comes down so that they still look like they know something, which they don't. And if they do, they're very, very bad people. But anyway, let's go into this article from Financial Post, which says, Canada's debt to GDP ratio, nerve-wracking to see debt servicing costs rising so quickly, RBC economists say. Don Desjardins, RBC's deputy chief economist, speaks with Financial Post's Larissa Harapin on Canada's debt to GDP ratio covering federal, corporate, and household levels. And as you can see, this is a video, and of course with YouTube nowadays, if we played the video for you, then, well, we would just get taken down. They give us a copyright strike even with fair use. But nonetheless, we're going to talk about what she said, which is that the second biggest cost for the government going forward is nerve-wracking to her. It's our debt. And it's second only to old age pensioners, etc., Social Security. So, and that is another big issue that we've talked about many times as well, John. I think that this is very demonstrable over time as you look through history, as so many governments and centralized, economies that have been propped up into oblivion have been so heavily based on debt. We see governments giving people jobs, like that's another one, like employment, vast employment, just, give the people, give the pawns, give the puppets, give the slaves jobs.
And then works great, Josh.
Yeah, steal from them in order to give from them, and then steal from them more and give to them, and then inflate the price of living dramatically while devaluing their currency, and then push them further into debt servitude while putting everyone into these pension plans, a social security system where they're just so dependent on the government and getting their money stolen from them and placed without their consent, essentially, into these stupid bankster pyramid schemes. I mean, John, can you talk a little bit about this? Because I know we've talked a lot before about how a lot of the banks are showing that they're kind of concerned, they're kind of worried, they're kind of seeing something coming in the near future. Anyone who's studied economics or finances, even to the slightest extent, basic economics, can see this is coming. But what do you think?
Well, I think we have a massive debt problem. I called it back in 2015 when we wrote the initial book, Canada, the Greatest Economy in the World, ? And of course, that is a huge worry because you can only grow debt to a certain point where you get debt saturation, where there's nobody else to borrow that debt to. Now, secondly of all, they said that, there's no worry if the GDP is higher and, it cancels out the debt. The problem is, though, what kind of GDP are you looking at? Are you looking at, for example, in the United States, where a big part of the GDP is just dying and unhealthy people? That's not really a good GDP measure. That's a terrible industry that they're making a whole bunch of money on, sick people that they made sick in the first place. And there's we could go into so great detail on that conspiracy, but we're not going to right now. But that is what you got to look at too. What kind of GDP are you actually creating out of this? Is it the government GDP? Are you actually creating just a GDP out of giving people jobs to push paper around? That's not a real good GDP. That's not a real good business measuring those type of growth in those kind of sectors where you actually are destroying productivity. You are really not very good. Like it's a super terrible measure. So what you got to look at is the actual how much debt do we have in Canada? And the problem here in Canada is we have, rampant debt. The last numbers, unfortunately, we haven't gotten any numbers from 2018 yet on the private debt to GDP, but they were about 267% in 2017. I don't think it's gotten any better in Canada. I think it's gotten worse, unfortunately. And so you see that growth in debt as well. You see the real estate markets in Toronto and Vancouver especially. You see, of of course, the oil sector got just pummeled during the last, oil crash, where it went up in 2008. It was 120 something, and then it dropped down to about 30 at the worst. And actually, here in Canada, we have a huge problem where the oil sector is not able to send that oil to anybody. So that oil price dropped. It's almost 2/3 of what the rest of the world sells their oil for. And it's not sustainable at all. And it's crashed the economy completely in places like Alberta, Josh.
Yeah, and I also want to add on top of that, because there's more than just a few bankers that are warning of a recession on the near horizon. I mean, the World Bank is warning of darkening skies for the global economy coming up. Of course, Italy just fell into a recession, as we warned about for years. We see the UK Central Bank, the Bank of England, talking about how we are going towards a new recession because of the Brexit deal. And then, of course, you have all these other examples, and Deutsche Bank warned the Eurozone not that long ago in February that the Eurozone is close to a recession. And look, we have so many of these things all happening at the same time, and it just goes without saying. We've been talking about this for so long, but I think that a lot of the banks, from their perspective, it's that, well, we know that our reputations are going to be destroyed. Most of us are going to be destroyed ourselves. I mean, the banks are going down. They're heavily bankrupt at the time. Their cash to deposit ratio is absolutely terrible, as you've gone into. But on top of that, I think that they're just kind of looking at the past videos out there, for example, of Paul Krugman and people like Ben Bernanke saying everything's fine, everything's just okay. We'll just keep on printing money, as Alan Greenspan recently said as well. We'll just print money. Don't worry about it. We can always print money. This is a huge problem where people just buy this up. They eat this up because people aren't aware of money. They don't understand money. Therefore, they're dependent on those that create the money and just hope that they can just trust them, that everything's going to be okay, when they push you into servitude, when they push you into debt, which leads you to servitude. But something that you mentioned there, John, was regarding, for example, like people dying, and that's a big part. But on top of that, there's also the pensioners, which they mentioned the biggest spending is the Social Security system. And I think this is a major issue as well, because obviously baby boomers, for example, are huge spenders into the economy, the biggest spenders into the economy. And then the millennial generation and parts of Generation X, even to some extent, are still dependent on their parents that are baby boomers, and hoping that they can take care of them. So that's a huge problem. There's a debt load from the millennial side. There's a debt load from the baby boomer side. And then on top of that, the pension shortfall worldwide. But this is a part of that everything bubble that we've been talking about, is that there's so many bubbles. And one of the major ones that I can't help but think it's going to end with, people with torches in the streets, is the pension bubble, the shortfall, looking at potentially as much as a $400 trillion shortfall worldwide by the year 2050, according to some studies. So how big do you think this is going to play into this problem that this RBC banker warned of?
Well, this is massive, Josh, especially with the pension part. What you're going to see is the promises that have been promised to all these pensioners for so long is not going to be upheld. And just recently in Norway, I just had a talk with my mom. She's going out into a strike because the union is wanting to have a pension reform because they're not getting enough money back on their pensions. And of course, and on top of that, you have the Norwegian government, the pension that they actually give you, that so many Norwegians are dependent on, because they're getting taxed to death on the one side and then they're heavily indebted on the other side. So they really don't have any money to save up for themselves for the long term. A lot of people ending up on government pension, like government old age security. And what there was a recent article from the VG.no, which is the Verdens Gang, it's called, and they said that in Norway, the average pensioner, the old age pensioner, they're living in poverty. And why? Well, it's because of heavy inflation in Norway. All this money printing, slowly seeping into the economy when people are trying to exit out of the real estate market, out of stock markets, and so on. So that money is slowly rotating back into the economy. At one point, when people are seeing the problems and are trying to exit out of the economy and trying to sell off their investments. Now, the problem is going to be who's going to buy, for example, the baby boomers' investments, the stocks, the bonds, and everything that they hold. that is probably the number one issue that we're going to see over the next 5 years. We might see a huge calamity coming because of that, because the millennials, the Generation X, they don't really trust the government, they don't trust the banks. And what you got to remember,
hope not.
Yeah. But what you got to see, well, there's probably a lot of them that still do, but what you got to see is you actually got to understand that this is all a propaganda game to try to make you trust the system itself. And just play a part of that system, because the longer they could play you and manipulate you to think that everything is good, the better they are positioned to then take full action and the next time when things go south, and then freeze your assets because you were stupid enough to keep your money in the bank. They'll put out capital controls because the government and the banks don't have the money in cash, of course. So they would put limits on the cash withdrawals that you can take. Like, just look at Cyprus and Greece and other countries just recently over the last decade. There's been a lot of these issues happening everywhere. And then on top of that, all that debt is just going to come crushing down as well, because the major problem here is that people cannot afford to pay back their debt anymore. My mom is talking about, I'm just talking about Norway here, and you've seen people that are so heavily indebted that they are living in nicer houses, but they don't have any furniture, no nothing in them. So they're house poor. A lot of Norwegians are house poor. A lot of Canadians are house poor.
Well, we're seeing that everywhere. Australia, the United States, definitely. And that's a huge problem as well. But I mean, another question, like, who's buying the 10-year government bond? I mean, a lot of this all plays together. We have to look at everything, the derivatives bubble worldwide, which is multi-quadrillion dollar levels, the housing bubbles, the pension bubbles, the student loan bubbles, which is a huge part as well, which also pushes into the hands of, people like baby boomers that end up having to pay for their kids. And then, of course, their kids, many of them getting crazy loans, and then loan on top of loan on top of loan, and then they're paying forever and paying off the interest on the debt, much like the government paying off the interest on the debt. And again, an example of someone that has no intention to ever actually pay that debt because they can't. And, it's just gotten to crazy levels everywhere. We're not talking about one country here. We're talking about the United States, Canada, Norway, Britain, Australia. Everywhere you go, this is a problem. And folks, this is why that we talk and do these videos. We do these videos for you because we want individuals to realize these problems, because they need to save up. We can't put a date on the coming crash. We just know it's going to happen, and it has to happen. And we've been vindicated in everything we've been saying over the years, over and over and over again, and people still call us crazy. We're just trying to yell from mountaintops, guys, do something, be responsible, be self-sustainable, provide for yourself, be able to protect your purchasing power one way or another for the coming calamity. This isn't Chicken Little, the sky is falling. This is, hey, I see snow coming down that mountain at me. I think there's an avalanche. No, you guys are crazy. There's no avalanche. No, there's clearly an avalanche.
That's what Krugman is saying, Josh.
Yeah. And in that case, you don't want to yell from the top of a mountain. But anyway, the point is, this is all coming to fruition at the same time. Recession, one of the biggest financial crises I think that's ever existed. I mean, all fiat currency has eventually reverted to its true value of zero, always has, always will, going back to 1024 AD in China, so that's 1,000 years. But on top of that, the 2008 recession was just pushed off. It was just, everyone's like getting distracted by the bankers. Hey, look over here, we got some
more
keys.
Free money.
Yeah, and everything's fine, don't worry, we fixed the problem, all is well. No, they pushed it off, and the further they push it off, the worse it's gonna be. So solutions is, as I always say, food, water, shelter, self-defense. You're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block. Gold and silver as wealth insurance, not investment advice, our opinion, but nonetheless, it's not meant as an investment because it's wealth insurance. It's a way to preserve your purchasing power against crashes. And we can look through history and see that. We got an affiliate link with Mike Maloney, who has been an incredible person when it comes to teaching the world about the history of money, hidden secrets of money, all that kind of stuff. And obviously is great with selling gold and silver, really good prices. I believe silver right now, 79 cents above spot, so that's pretty good. So check that out. And we also have We also have to tell everyone about cryptocurrency that is sound, fundamentally useful, and decentralized, as well as a blockchain infrastructure technology which you can use to replace governments and central banks if you utilize the right technology and not fall for the same old technocratic nonsense, cashless society, fiat-controlled, illegal tender law crap that the banks are pushing forward in governments around the world, like China. But anyway, John, as we close this off, can you tell people your bottom line?
Well, the bottom line here is that we're heading for a massive cliff because we accumulated so much debt. And that's what the RBC head economists are saying, Desjardins. It's funny how the Desjardins family, there's actually a bank called Desjardins Bank. And you see the family names are always around in these top banks. Same with, the Morgans and others in other big banks around the world. And they like to keep control. What you got to understand, this is the bottom line here. And it is that this is a propaganda game that is played against you, and they're trying to tell you that everything is fine. Keep on, saving in the US dollar, keep on saving Canadian dollars. Go into stocks, go into bonds, everything is fine. The economy is not going to crash. The problem here is the mountain of not even mountain, the planet of debt that we have created around the world. And you got to remember, you said that all fiat currencies revert to zero, Josh, but we never had a global fiat currency system that we have now when everybody is on the fiat standard. And that is a massive, crazy experiment that is going to turn really bad, because it's turned actually bad several places already just in the last decade now. And you're going to see a lot more of them coming, because they just, a lot of the currencies that we currently have, they're about, everywhere from 45 till 10, 15 years old. Yeah. So they haven't, seen that debt spiral that the fiat currency go into. And we were seeing that with the euro and everybody. And you were saying that who's buying all this debt? Well, it's usually the central banks that are buying all the debt. And they keep on pushing each other. So like, Bank of Japan, go and buy debt. And then ECB's buying debt over here. And then the Fed is buying debt over here, just on a cycle. So they're all working together, because that's how they keep the global system afloat. So just start to exit out of that into things that are outside of the banking system. That's where you got to go. Get out of the freaking banking system, because that is their power hold over you. And if you take that power away from them and take away the intermediary that the banks are, they are the money creators of the world. If you take that power away from them, they're going to tumble and fall into pieces, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the bigger the cancer, the more dangerous. And if it doesn't work on the local, it's not going to work on the national. It's not going to work on the global. And folks, we got to learn that. We got to be independent and self-responsible. Responsibility is key, because responsibility is a hallmark of freedom itself. And of course, defense is a hallmark of responsibility itself. So be defended, and make sure to defend yourself, and make sure to protect yourself. So anyway, thanks for going into this with us, John. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here, WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so heavily demonetized and censored by YouTube, as these guys come in and flag all of our content as hate speech. The shadow banning is getting really bad, guys. Also, check our Bitcoin address right here on the screen or in the description below. We really appreciate it. And of course, check us out at the Red Pill Expo 2019. Of course, the great G. Edward Griffin and so many other incredible speakers will be there. Our link for that is below as well. And we cannot forget Mike Maloney's goldsilver.com, which you can also find in the description. One of the greatest market and monetary historians out there. We really encourage everyone to check that out. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.